I'm Senior Research Fellow at IFPRI and lead of one of the initiatives that were discussed during the fireside chat called SHIFT. And I'm professor at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And I'm joined by 6 speakers. 5 of them you see here with me on stage, and I will introduce them later to you when they will start their talk. And there is 1 person online. And I hope that we are in connection with this person. So let's keep our fingers crossed. So I don't have to repeat that the accelerated by the preparations and the dialogues towards the Food System Summit 2021, and now with the preparations towards the food system transformation stocktaking, which will take place in Rome in July. But in many countries, although they have identified or developed with multi-stakeholders their food system transformation national action plan, there are still many questions that are coming to us on orange flesh sweet potato food systems or rice food systems or groundnut food systems. You know, there's a lot of talk about food systems and what is transformation. And what are food system innovations or interventions different than value chain interventions? And what should we do different than we did before? And as a consequence, you see that many strategies and so-called game changers that are identified in these national action plans are actually following, you know, the plans that we had in former days. So maybe you can call them, many of them are old wine in new bottles. And we have to find a way to find food system to better outcomes. And as we learned in the first day, better outcomes to ensure that we as human beings survive. So often what you see, the plans are rural oriented, oriented on production and increasing efficiency or increasing production. They are market oriented, increasing with the aim to increase livelihoods and income, to improve diets and to support health.
Back from lunch. I hope we can keep your interest for this session.
Kenya.
Thank you, everyone. It's an honor to be here at the conference and to share our work. I think I'm definitely inspired by the conversations that we've already been having, particularly the one on intersectionality yesterday, and thinking about different axes of oppression or of marginalization, and how we can do disaggregated analysis to even question how do different, for example, different groups of women benefit or not benefit from the interventions we're implementing. So our project looked at a multi-sectoral agricultural intervention in Western Kenya and compared whether widowed women compared to married women, whether they had different or similar outcomes from these interventions, and then trying to theorize or hypothesize why those outcomes could be similar or different. We all know that HIV/AIDS prevalence is highest in Africa globally, and there's also high prevalence of food insecurity in Africa. And we also know that people living with HIV/AIDS experience higher rates of food insecurity with the detrimental effect on their health, both health and social outcomes. So what we may not know too well is the situation of widowed women in Africa. Among women living with HIV/AIDS, you find that widowed women have a higher prevalence as a cohort. And because of social stigmatization of widowhood in the context of Africa, widows face higher risk for HIV/AIDS and also higher risks for poor health outcomes when they're infected. This stigma itself is a fundamental cause for population health inequalities, and for widowed women, stigma is a root cause for economic inequalities, sexual vulnerabilities. So, for example, you find in our context, and I think those of us in Africa know these stories of widows being disinherited from their land, and then property disinheritance increasing, you know, reducing the agricultural productivity, increasing food insecurity, and so the cycle continues. And a number of studies show that comparing widowed women and married women show that widowed women have poorer HIV health outcomes. If you take both groups of women living with HIV, it's lower ART initiation, higher rates of depression, and even higher rates of morbidity. So our question was, given this backdrop that widowed women are quite vulnerable, and those who are HIV/AIDS, would these multi-sectoral agricultural intervention have similar or different outcomes in these two groups of women? So the intervention has been spoken a bit about before, but it included an irrigation pump and a loan, a microfinance loan that the women and the participants in the trial used to acquire a pump and buy also farm inputs, and also structured training on sustainable agriculture and financial literacy. And this intervention was implemented. There we go. The intervention was implemented. So this is the conceptual framework that we used in the program. So the hypothesis was that if you take this multi-sectoral intervention, agricultural intervention, and you implement it among people living with HIV/AIDS in a context where they are receiving routine HIV care and treatment, then the intervention would improve food security through increased production. The focus was on vegetables, so increased production of vegetables, and surplus vegetables can be sold to the market, so the women could have additional money that they could use to buy other types of foods to supplement their diet. And with improved food security and additional income, then we hope there would be improved nutrition, improved ART adherence, and retention in care, as well as other outcomes, all of which should lead to improved HIV, reduced morbidity, and hopefully reduced mortality. So that was the conceptual framework that guided the implementation. The study participants were people living with HIV/AIDS, adults age 18 to 60, the impact of the intervention. So for the results I'm presenting, it's a sub-analysis comparing only widowed women and married women who were enrolled in the intervention. So for baseline results, as expected, we found that widowed women in the intervention were older than married women, but you can see that their average age for the widowed women was 42 years compared to 30-something years for the married women. Then also in terms of household headship, as expected, majority of the widowed women reported themselves as the household heads, 97% compared to 10% for the married women. Other baseline indicators such as food insecurity, wealth, and also viral load suppression were similar in both groups, but you can notice that viral load suppression was high at baseline, around 82%. But now we look at the outcomes we wanted to assess over a 24-month period. So the orange is the intervention and the blue is a control. When you look at viral load suppression, there wasn't, we did both within group analysis and between group analysis. So if you look at the within group analysis for the widowed and the married women, you'll see for the viral load suppression, there was no difference between intervention and control, and also between the two groups. But then for other outcomes such as depression and stigma, internalized and anticipated stigma, we saw greater reductions of those outcomes for both widowed and married women comparing intervention and control, but no difference between the groups in terms of whether reductions greater for one group or the other. Those were similar. But then there were two outcomes that we saw difference between widowed women and married women. One of those was social support, where if you can trace those lines for social support, you find that married women had a greater reduction greater improvement in their social support, which was measured by higher scores in social support meant higher scores meant lower social support. So when you have lower scores, it means you are having more social support. This similarly for enacted stigma, married women had better outcomes after 24 months compared to widowed women. You can see that they started with the highest enacted stigma scores. Higher scores means higher enacted stigma, and they ended up with the lowest scores. So what we are learning from these results is that for certain outcomes that we thought of as individual level outcomes, such as depression, food security, internalized and anticipated stigma, for those outcomes, both widowed women and married women fared. They benefited similarly. And we think that for widowed women, given that the vulnerability they are starting with, this could be as a result of their agency. So there's a literature out here showing that widowed women, being the household heads, having higher having more decision-making power, they have more control over what crops they're planting and how they're utilizing the income from those crops. But for some other outcomes, such as the enacted stigma and social support that are socially dependent, that depending on the external environment, widowed women had poorer outcomes compared to married women. And we think that we need to do more research to understand the larger societal context, especially stigma, and widowed women could be experiencing more intersectional stigma that we need to understand further. So I would like to just thank the bursary from ANH to be able to present here, and my co-authors, some of whom are in the audience, and also the funders that have made both the research and my training possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Let's turn to Charlotte.